This first discussion will look at synergies between the different university missions and also the different policy levels. These synergies are absolutely crucial to achieving the goals that we set out in our Universities Without Walls vision for 2030, and they're also at the heart of the European Strategy for Universities. And so I think this is a really important and timely discussion. So I'm going to hand over to our moderator for the first session, who is Thomas Jorgensen, who is Senior Policy Coordinator at EUA, and he'll take you through the next section of the programme. So Thomas, over to you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Yes, indeed, we're going to look at a topic that was already touched upon in several of the other presentations, and I think a basic element of any university strategy since the days of Humboldt, the synergies between the university missions, questioning how can we develop the synergies and the links between learning and teaching, research, innovation, culture, so that they all enrich each other within the institution of the university and, of course, with its partners. So we're going to look at this a little bit at the institutional, at the national, at the European level, and we have quite I would say an expert panel, a very, very long time experienced panel in all these discussions about synergies. In any case, before we open the floor, we should have, I think we were a bit fast on the trigger. We had this poll before, but I would just like to ask the audience about how the synergies look like where they are, particularly what are the obstacles to synergies. I think we now have a bit of a stabilized idea about what are the problems. Different funding, different programs, academic career assessment. I think those are the high flyers on this. So that's interesting. I would invite the speakers very much to react to that. What kind of the kind of reactions you have to this and how that fits with your experience. Okay, Darinka, please.
Thank you for inviting me to this interesting panel. I hope you hear me well. You do?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm sure that together with Jens Peter and Marc, we will address the topic from different perspectives. I will approach it from the perspective of policy developments at EU level. And if I would like to share with you the information produced by the Bologna follow-up group, the BFUG Special Task Force on Synergies. So first of all, I'm delighted, of course, to see that higher education has never been so high on the EU agenda as it is right now. And I was very happy to see that in 4 years' time after the French president initiative on European universities, we have had countless events on the future strategy for European universities and the whole higher education sector. These events have been organized by the European Commission, by the member states holding EU presidencies, international actors in the field of higher education institutions themselves, and so on and so on. And all these consultations, I'm happy to see, finally culminated in adoption of a number of important legislative documents, in particular the last package presented this month by the European Commission. And within all these consultations, the issue of synergies between different missions of higher education institutions, especially education and research, is of course a small, but in my mind, a very important piece of the puzzle. And we know that the issue has always been on the EU agenda, as well as on the agenda of the European higher education area, or the Bologna process. That's not surprising, since the developments in the Bologna process over more than 2 decades always inspired the EU agenda and vice versa. Unfortunately, at the same time, we have to admit that this priority was never really translated into action. I do hope that this will change now with the document on European strategy that is at the same time, in fact, an action plan with more than 40 measures that should be implemented over the next years. So during the first 2 decades of the Bologna process, the synergies between the European higher education and the European research area were repeatedly mentioned in ministerial communiques, but were seldom addressed more concretely. In the second decade, however, references on linking the 2 areas became more and more explicit. The last Rome communique from 2020 called on BFUG to work closely with the European Research Area and Innovation Committee on topics like research-based learning, academic and scientific freedom, and United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Consequently, in 2021, the Bologna follow-up group set up a special ad hoc task force co-chaired by the European Commission and Slovenia, with mandate to prepare a proposal how to increase synergies between the 3 policy areas, namely the European education, higher education, and research area. The task force then submitted a proposal to BFUG, and the BFUG adopted it in its last meeting in December 2021. So the BFUG proposal to its, I would say, EU counterparts identifies possible areas of synergies and also suggests possible methods of cooperation between the actors of the 2 areas. According to BFUG, topics that could advance synergies are the following ones: academic values and freedom of science, academic and research careers, transnational cooperation and transformation of higher education and research institutions, innovative and transdisciplinary learning, teaching and research, open science and open education, service to society, social dimension of higher education and research, and gender equality, and last but not least, international cooperation with non-EU partners and contribution to United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. BFUG, it must be said, has a very well-developed working structures. And in fact, 5 of them, namely 4 working groups and 1 task force, already expressed their willingness to work on these topics together with EU partners. Then the BFUG proposal also identifies key governance structures within the 3 areas, policy areas, that could jointly work on topics of common interest. To first think together and then act together, the BFUG proposes to have regular exchanges on information between the 3 areas, to mutually invite representatives of other areas to attend relevant meetings, to organize joint dedicated events, and to consider the whole higher education sector when developing policies, tools, and instruments. Now, I believe it is up to the governance structures of European research and education area to respond to this proposal and start the cooperation, which shouldn't be too difficult since all the foundations are already there and in relevant EU documents. For example, the Council conclusions on the new European research area identifies institutional transformations, research careers, science education, training, international cooperation, and knowledge circulation as possible fields of a more determined cooperation. Besides, the European Commission also proposed to develop a roadmap of actions for creating synergies between higher education and research. So this is a good start, and I hope that the actors from both European higher education area as well as European Union education and research area will soon join forces in implementing the strategy and the measures presented by the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darinka. So on that note, I would like to go directly to Jens Peter. Is that okay, Jens Peter?
That would be fine for me. Thank you very much again for inviting me. And again, a big hello to all the folks worldwide. Thank you for your interest. I would like to say thank you for EUA for organizing that, and to all of you for joining this conference. Let me say a few words about, as an introductory point, about the strategy of the Commission as a whole, and then in the discussion we can focus maybe on the different dimensions. And let me tell you why we support it very strongly from the perspective of the German university system. It's quite clear that the universities serve society. That's the basic point. And they have these four basic dimensions: excellent research, high quality education, a strong and impactful transfer, and they also preserve and curate the cultural heritage of Europe. That's a very important point, I think. So we have these four dimensions forming together a kind of holistic approach. You could visualize it as a kind of rectangle. And this kind of status of the universities makes them, I think, unique within the institutions in civil society. If we have a look back, a short look back maybe, then we can see that the oldest university in continuous operation in Europe is, as we all know, University of Bologna, almost 950 years old. And the 9 of the 10 oldest universities worldwide are in Europe. So you can say that they represent a kind of long-lasting success story for wealth, for our cultural identity, and also for the difference between the European nations. So they are kind of Europe in a nutshell, you could say. And it's very nice and very good that the new strategy of the European Commission quotes that they are part and parcel of our European way of life. I'm saying that because looking at the strategy, it's the fourth one, as we all know, we think this has been a very, very strong move, because defining universities as holistic institutions, you can say that the Commission recognized universities as a kind of partner to raise the potential in Europe. And it's not only a very strong move in that respect, and it's also a very smart move in two respects. First respect is that if you see the university system as a partner system, you really avoid that kind of backlash and deadlock with the scientific community, because it's a highly protected community, protected by the law of autonomy, and that's one of the prerequisites of the university system to function. So you always have to keep in mind, if you work with university systems, that they are structurally conservative while highly innovative in the output. And to deal with that special thing, you have to see them as a partner. So it's a very strong and very smart move from the Commission to the university system, or to define it as a partner system. But it's also, from our point of view, a very smart move in another respect, that the Commission really changed the language in large parts. They really changed the language of their strategy. The university system doesn't want to and doesn't need to be reformed, transformed, renewed, modernized, harmonized, or whatever. And it's a very smart move that the strategy really avoids this kind of wording. Don't get me wrong, the university system has to change, it has to adapt, it has to develop, like we all have to do. like every institution has to do. That's perfectly clear also for the university system, but it has to be done with the university system and from within, and not as something from the outside. So this strategy opens up a new chapter. And the sector, I can say it only for the German university system, really strongly supports it. If we want to implement it, and that's, I think, the most important point here is how could it be done? And from our point of view, there are a few do's and don'ts that we have to keep in mind, and I just want to point them out. We already talked about the approach that universities are holistic institutions, and there is a strong interplay between the missions, between especially research and teaching, but also between research, teaching, and transfer, because transfer is more or less a product of these other dimensions. And having said that, it's quite obvious that we need also a holistic approach from the Commission side, also from the directorates involved, to act jointly. That sounds simple, but we all know that is a really challenge. And I'm very, very glad that under the supervision of Commissioner Gabriel, we had strong signals in that respect for the Commission directorates to act jointly. I'll just give you one example for that. I think the very strong instrument of the 20 actions now defined for the European research area, they should play a big role, or even bigger role, in the European strategy for universities too, as research is the driver for everything in universities. That's the first thing we have to look at, a holistic approach also within the Commission. The second point is that we need a kind, from our point of view, a kind of fair pan-European approach. Let me explain what I mean with that. You could look, for example, at the big field of teaching. If we look at Germany, we tend not to speak of education, but of formation. In Germany, it would be Bildung, the German word. I'm not quite sure how we could translate it, but it would mean that to study at university wouldn't reduce you to acquire some skills, but would try to turn you into a kind of creative person who is able to deal with the insecurity that is waiting for every one of us in a creative and problem-solving way. So it's a kind of like rather even changing the person in a bit, and it's always research-based. Though that would mean the study course would not be reduced to learn some skills. It would not be simply following the idea to satisfy the undefined and ever-changing needs of the labor market, and it would not be able to be replaced by a system of micro-credentials. These are important instruments, but they can't replace a study course. So this is the German perspective, the perspective from a very large system, which also has a very strong vocational education, but that does not necessarily fit for our partners in Europe. So we think that one second very important prerequisite for implementing the strategy would be to build bridges between the different university cultures throughout Europe. And it's a very good record by Frank Zappa, but for us, the most important message is no one size fits all, because we have to stay flexible and preserve the cultures. The third one would be, the third prerequisite would be, we would really recommend to have a bit more of emphasis on the cultural heritage. What we think is important to have culturally educated and value-based young generation coming up, and that would make it necessary also to have a strong emphasis on the humanities in the university system, not only on the technological side, but very strongly also on the humanities. My fourth point would be to let me be a bit blunt here, to avoid simple paradigm changes. It's so tempting to say that, let's say, open science will save the world, or a new research assessment system will save the world. These are very strong building blocks, and we have to deal with them in the future. It's quite clear. But they alone will not save the university system. And we have to be very careful to say we'll change the whole system under one paradigm. Again, don't get me wrong. I give you an example from Germany. We are strong advocates, for example, of open access, and I guess also kind of forerunner in that respect. And we will be following that very strongly in the future. But we have to be careful if we change the paradigms overnight. So we need a development together with the university system. My last point, my last prerequisite for a successful implementation would be that we need a kind of supporting governance too. And I'm very grateful for the signals I heard from the French presidency and from other countries that a kind of analog system to Iraq may be harmonized with the BFUG group for the part of education. I'll stop here as we are running out of time. We're ready to implement this strategy, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to tell you some thoughts from the German perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And it's not every day that we have Frank Zappa quotes here in EUA events. So that's always a welcome innovation. Okay, without further ado, because we're a bit short on time, Marc, please go ahead. 5 minutes.
So I wanted to come back on this issue of, synergy between education, research, and innovation. From my double perspective of working in the policy making, but also in the academic world and teaching and doing only a little bit, unfortunately, in those days of research. So, I think nothing is really new in this regard, but nevertheless, I think that open science, it's not a revolution. It has been progressive. In my opinion, universities are open to the world since the Middle Ages, at least. But open science provides new opportunities of cross-fertilization between teaching, research, and innovation, in the broadest meaning of the term. Economic innovation, technological innovation, social innovation. And I would like to provide you with a very concrete example, which I like very much from the Fédération Wallonie-Brussels and from our researchers. We are, and I think it's important that at the policy making and administrative level, government level, we provide structural funding and an enabling context, an enabling framework. And we, for example, we fund ES Survey, which is a big European infrastructure in social science in Europe. And through the results from ES Survey, 5 years ago, two researchers from the University of Liège, Lafleur and Marfouque, wrote a book for the broader audience about the migration phenomenon, trying to show what are the misperceptions of the Belgians about the migration in Belgium, using scientific results from ES Survey. And because we are funding and supporting very much green open access and repositories, they could not only publish the book in a traditional way through the bookshops, but also deposit the book directly in the repository of their university. And it's absolutely fascinating because this book has received more than 16,000 downloads. I just checked before the meeting today, more than 16,000 downloads for 600 books that have been sold to the traditional bookshops. So this is really fascinating, the societal impact that open science allows, the societal potential innovation in regard to this societal challenge of migration that we could reach because of the book and because of open access repositories. And finally, I would like to add that this book has also been used in schools for providing teaching material, free teaching material in the debates with students and with pupils about migration. It has also been used in public debates, in the media. So I don't think that open science is a revolution, but I think that open science puts innovation, research, and teaching in a new context, in a new framework. And in regard to the governments, it is our task to provide an enabling framework in this regard, structural funding, and to provide the adequate rewards. That's the whole issue of research assessment, academic, more broadly, academic assessments. So yeah, I think in a few words, this is what I wanted or wished to say. And I really hoped that people could hear me. I'm not sure, but I hope. So yeah, those were my 5 minutes.
Yes, that's Marc. I think we got some good points out of it. I think it is a very broad topic. It is a very that reaches to the heart of who we are. But I would just, before going on to the next, because we're already over time, try to summarize it, that we have, as it was in the chat and as it was also said by others, we want this. Everybody agrees that this is necessary, and you try on the governance level to make the different parts, the education area, the higher education area, the research area, talk together. You have issues on the ground, as came up in the chat, with structures. But you also need that, as I think Jens Peter Gaul very much hinted at, that there's no one trick that will make things perfect. It's really there's a holistic approach needed to that. So this will be interesting to follow. And it's of course always interesting to do once you're on the ground. So again, apologies for the technical problems. And many thanks for me. I will hand over to the next panel. Thank you very much.